Hey folks, welcome to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. And I am really excited for today's conversation. First of all, it's been 3 weeks since I've done a show. I have been on a 3-week trip that took me to London, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. So it's been a minute since I've had the opportunity to go live. And today's guest is no stranger to pre-sales. I'm not allowed to say how long she's been doing this, so that'll be our secret. But Patty Hager, she is a VP of Solution Engineering in the SMB segment, small and medium-sized business segment with Salesforce. She and I met in New York a few months ago, and when she and I chatted a little bit, I knew she had to be a guest on the show, and here she is. Patty, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Chris, great to be here. Excited for the conversation. As you know, pre-sales is my passion, and I'm really excited to talk a bit about my favorite sector in pre-sales, SMB.
Awesome. Well, it's funny. First of all, almost nobody talks about SMB. So I think this is an important conversation. And just in the few chats that you and I have had, you've even opened my eyes a little bit to maybe some of the things that I hadn't considered. So really excited to have this conversation. By the way, I see Tim, I hope I'm saying this right, Bielski, I hope I'm saying that right, said hello. Folks, we don't see you out there, so by all means, if you care to say hello, please do so. If you have any questions for Patty or myself, please ask. Patty, I introduced you briefly, but do you mind taking just a minute and introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, happy to. So my background, I started my career in a medical information systems software company called Meditech in the greater Boston area. Right after I had completed my MBA at Northeastern University, go Huskies. And I ended up moving into a customer facing role in that medical information systems company because during my MBA, I did a co-op in finance and I was doing cost accounting. I was working for a semiconductor company. Your path to your career, it's just as important to figure out where you don't want to deploy your talents as where you do want to deploy your talents. And I realized I couldn't be behind spreadsheets all day, right?
Amen.
So started to do a little assessment after that internship. I'm like, I want to be in front of customers. I want to be impacting the top line.
Yeah.
I'd like to be a consultant type, but I was very interested in high tech. So that came together with that company in Boston, worked there for 5 years, and then several software companies along the way, notably Computer Associates, Oracle. I worked for an SAP VAR. Then I pivoted to Lenovo. So I was like, okay, let's try tech, but a different flavor of tech, and let's go
Yeah.
down the device manufacturing route. Had a
Yeah.
great journey there, but then, decided to come back to my roots in software and this opportunity at Salesforce, leading SMB solution engineering was that opportunity to go do so. So
Yeah. It's so interesting to me the way so many of us found pre-sales, sales engineering, and the fact that you recognized you didn't want to spend your life sitting behind a spreadsheet. I'm the first to admit it took me a little bit longer to figure it out. I was an IT consultant, enterprise architecture consultant for 15 years before I found pre-sales. So I'm a little envious of the fact that you discovered it so early. When you and I spoke about a month or so ago, you mentioned to me that you had this opportunity to come quote back to SMB, and you were inspired to take it because there were so many reasons that you liked SMB. Let's pick that apart a little bit, because I think some people consider SMB almost to be sort of like the entry level position or the entry level sector for pre-sales. And based on our conversation, it sounds like you have a very different opinion about that.
yeah, so when I started in the SMB sector, it was probably about 2014-ish. I was working at a analytics software company called SAS, SAS.
Mm-hmm.
And they're based, where I live
Based in
in
Raleigh.
Cary,
Yeah, yeah.
North Carolina. Yes.
Yeah.
So I had an opportunity to lead pre-sales for SMB Americas. Well, actually US. And it was an opportunity that I kind of, spent a little bit of time thinking about, because most of my experience had been in the vertical sector, namely communications, media, and tech.
Okay.
So, and I was so comfortable in that vertical, but as I assessed the opportunity, a couple of things really struck me. One was, gosh, I get to talk to just about any company, right? It could be a retailer one day, it could be a small media company the next, it could
Yeah.
be a lawn care company the next day. So I was
Yeah.
thinking, gosh, I could be learning every day. So that was
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was, as I dug in and talked to a lot of the account executives who had been working in SMB, they're like, Patty, you're talking to founders of companies. You're talking to people who are literally like, they've poured everything of their being into the company. And you know this,
Yeah.
Chris, by having
Yeah.
your own company.
Yeah.
And that excited me. So, did that for a while. And then that's when I moved to Lenovo, covering North America pre-sales. And I was covering SMB, the verticals, and then the mid-size sector. And I always had the most fun talking to SMBs, because it's like a lot of these business owners are coming up with a brand new concept. You're
Yeah.
learning kind of state of the art things.
Yeah.
Just the excitement and the passion that they
Yeah.
exude on calls. It really excited me. So, I ended up assessing, I'd always admired Salesforce as a company, and always that was top of my list. I'd wanted
Yeah.
to go there. So when I heard about the opportunity coupled with SMB and getting all those areas that I just love, right? The volume, velocity,
Yeah.
executive presence, and the diversity of industry, I was like, I'm in. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's so true. You mentioned just the diversity. I think one of the things that I have or one of the reasons I took to pre-sales is, and you know this, anybody who's done this for a while, every day is different. You're dealing with different clients, different problems, different business scenarios, different use cases. But you're right. If let's just say you've got 5 major Fortune 500 clients, or even fewer, and it's all telecom, for example, right? Or it's business, it's finance and banking. You're not dealing with as much diversity as you are in the SMB space, right? So you're learning more. Now, let me ask this. Do you look for different skills or different, I guess, characteristics in the people that you hire into SMB?
yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I've hired into both. Um, I would say the the main ingredients I look for are similar, but I think when you look at an SMB solution engineer, you want to hear things like, I want the diversity, calling
Mm,
cross industries. I get bored if I'm on one thing for a while. I want to have many different things going on, right? Like the quintessential multitasker. So those things I think stand out for me more as I'm interviewing in the SMB sector. But like if you look at foundational, like best in class pre-sale skills, I'm looking for folks that, just show they have technical chops, whether it's telling me a story about what they did at another company, or
yeah,
talking about their hobbies that happen to involve, something in the high tech sector. You look for that kind of skill set. And then you also look for those folks that are just strong communicators. And, I purposely, when I'm doing interviews, try to throw a curveball, and see how agile they're at
mm.
in the interview, because we know like the best laid plans sometimes don't work out, right? You get the notorious, like, I'm going into a meeting and we have an hour and everyone's going to be in the room. Well, oftentimes that doesn't happen. You get the executive joining halfway through, has missed the beginning. How do I pivot? How do
Right.
I, give them what they missed? So you've got to be one of those people who is extremely agile and can change courses quickly. And some solution engineers, they're fantastic, but it's a linear motion, and I find that that's really difficult in especially SMB.
Really well said. Really well said. It's funny, as you were saying, plans that go awry. One of my, and I've got lots of favorite sayings, but one of my favorite sayings is life is what happens when you've made other plans. Right. And the same goes for dealing with clients, customers, meetings, etc. By the way, Patty, let me just say hello. I see Barry Ross said hello. Barry, nice to see you. And Carly Bosch, I hope I'm saying that right, or Bash. Not nice to see you folks. If you care to say hello, please do so. I'm speaking with Patty Hager. She's a VP of Solution Engineering with Salesforce, targeting the SMB. By the way, Patty, I noticed your SMB logo. Does that say "Rev it up"? Is that
Rev it up?
Is that your slogan that you came up with?
It's the operating unit that I'm associated with. It's our annual slogan that initiated at our kickoff.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. So we've talked a little bit about some of the things that make SMB appealing, certainly to people that have a thirst for a more dynamic working environment and a set of challenges and problems and organizations to deal with. What are some of the challenges that you think are maybe a little bit unique to working in the SMB space?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's several, which actually makes it even more fun.
Of
But
course.
a lot of the challenges revolve around. So our deals typically are fast moving, right?
Yep.
Sometimes they can happen within the month. We get a lead and boom, we close it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Others might take 90 days, but they're normally pretty fast cycles.
Yeah.
So some of the challenges, pre-sales solution engineers typically want to go deep, show all the great functionality of the products. And sometimes it's like, we just need to convince the client we can meet their
Mm,
needs, but
yeah.
we don't have to go A to Z down that menu of options, right? So the challenge is keeping it high level enough, keeping the deal moving,
Yeah.
getting the technical win, but not going so deep that we elongate the sales cycle. So that's
Yeah.
one thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is my team are called core SCs,
Mm,
solution
okay.
engineers. So they cover the larger clouds within the Salesforce product umbrella. And a lot of times, given that it's SMB, we may not get a specialist SC,
Mm,
and that's another whole conversation, core versus specialist SC,
mm,
because that's a different dynamic too. But
totally.
oftentimes we don't have those specialists jumping into our deals, so we need to
Yeah.
know a lot.
Yeah.
So we're very, very broad, deep but not too deep. So, there's a lot of pressure on the team to get to know things. And
Yeah.
it's really important that we continuously learn, but there's just a lot of demands on someone in SMB. So those I would say are the two greatest pressures.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. By the way, I don't know if you can see Jeff Margulies, I hope I'm saying that right, has asked a question and it's related to how you define SMB. So how do you define SMB? Is it based on number of employees, annual revenue, et cetera? And how do you see other organizations making that determination?
Yeah. So in my company, it's based on employee count.
Okay.
And Chase from my team actually jumped in. So
I see
thank you
that.
for
Yeah.
that. Yeah, we're around 200
Okay.
employees, give or take.
Okay.
And then we have another aspect to our business where like, I think it's like 45 and under is another unit. So I'm basically 200 to 45-ish employees. And that in and of itself drives a lot of different types of things, right? Because you get those companies that they're going to stay small and that's their goal, that's their charter. And then you get others who are like, driving up and trying to get acquired or, pre-IPO. And then there's a lot of different aspects that happen there, especially if you've got private equity investors that are expecting certain things along the way. So
Yeah.
lots of different dynamics depending on the type of company. But yeah, we don't have a revenue clip. It's an employee clip. Prior company I worked for, it was a revenue clip, and I think it was like 250 million and below. So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned when I was asking some of the challenges, you mentioned the speed at which the transactions tend to go. So the team needs to make sure that, for example, when they're doing demos, they're not going too deep, they're not elongating the process. You also mentioned because it's SMB, it sounds like you don't have the opportunity to bring in the specialists that your team is responsible for, I guess, knowing a little bit about a lot of things, if that's a fair way to put it, or they need to sort of, they need to have breadth over depth necessarily. What about discovery? Because my perception is that in a fast-paced segment like SMB, you may not get as much opportunity to do sort of the extensive discovery that maybe the longer enterprise B2B sales process might have. How do you all handle discovery and integrate that into your process?
Yeah, we use a bunch of different ways, to net it out. We try to understand what the client needs to best understand how they can decide on technology. So a lot of times we're leaning on them to understand what they need through their procurement process because we don't want to
Okay.
add unnecessary steps. And I think that's one thing that people newer to tech sales, okay, we got to do disco and it's got to be X number of meetings and then we'll go to demo. It's like, don't insert steps that aren't needed. So firstly, we find out what the client needs, right? And we do that via executive alignment. In terms of discovery, a lot of information, I like to see the team do what's publicly available first. And that's sometimes a mistake that people make too, is like go out to their website, Google their execs, look on LinkedIn, get as much information as possible so you can go in with that next level of questioning that you wouldn't get if you didn't explore the company and the execs first. So I encourage the team to do that. Our discoveries can sometimes turn into disco demos, again, depending on the client and how quick their cycle is.
Yeah.
So sometimes we need to ask a few questions, show a little bit of technology. Hey, does this resonate? You mentioned this, we were thinking these capabilities would map. And that can also be an accelerant to the sales cycle. There's a number of different processes that we undertake around the discovery and readback process. I won't get into those specifics, but there's a lot of different flavors to it. And I think the key is understanding what the client requires first.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you mentioned do your homework, right? Do your research. One of the things that I tell all the teams that I work with and the people that worked for me for years, we should not be asking questions for things that we can discover on our own, right? I mean, do your homework, right? Do your homework before you get into the meeting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of that brings me to a story. When I was an SC, I was calling on a hospital, and there was a lot of information on the CEO. He had spoken at an event. There was his point of view on a particular industry trend that was going on. So I spent a lot of time just understanding his point of view and went into the meeting with even quotes, like you said this here's how we can help. And I took some initial stabs at, based on what I heard,
Yeah.
some initial ideas. And that's kind of what I put on the slide. It was like initial ideas, like how we could potentially get started today. And I'll never forget, like the CEO stopped the meeting and was like, Patty, wow, a lot of people don't go through this sort of due diligence before they get into a meeting. And
Mm.
for not working at the hospital, you know us pretty well. And I was like, okay. And you can't do that obviously for every account, especially
Yeah.
in SMB, because our pace is so fast.
Yeah.
But you can sense what opportunities might make sense to do that level of diligence, right? You
Yeah.
can see indicators where this is going to be, one of those really large SMB accounts that we potentially have a multi-cloud opportunity. We're aligned at like a CEO level. Gosh, we should spend a little bit of time doing this work.
And isn't it amazing that the homework that you did, it probably seems so natural to you and just sort of business as usual, and yet it struck him as different and odd, right? I mean, it's just amazing to me that more people don't do this. And I think one of the, for anybody listening, I mean, one of the key takeaways is you do have to go the extra mile, right? And it's not that much work, but it makes a huge difference, right? It's just amazing to me. Okay,
Yeah.
so another question that came to mind, you were mentioning that the the pace is different, and you're dealing with, in some cases, company owners, founders, people who are entrepreneurs themselves. How does that actually change the way your team either positions and or demonstrates the solution, and or does it?
Yeah, I think it changes it in that when you're talking, especially to a founder or a C level of a small business, you certainly want to make sure you're listening really intently. It's not like a director of a Fortune 100 that's got thousands of other director levels. Like if it's coming from the founder or a C level at an SMB, it's pretty damn near the direction of the company, right? Like
Yes.
there's not as many stakeholders. That's the other thing. Like I think the last report I saw, I think it was from Gartner, there's 13 to 15 stakeholders in an enterprise software decision. Like
Oh
in
yeah.
a small business decision, there's probably, 3 to 5.
Yeah.
And when you listen to the direction and the needs, I mean, there's no like scratching off, oh, this came from this stakeholder over here that may not be as
Right.
important. It's like in the readbacks, that is front and center of the deal
Yeah.
strategy. So I would
Yeah.
say, our discos are with less stakeholders, extremely
Mm,
important stakeholders.
mm,
If they're, and I don't see, sometimes in like enterprise sales, you'll see some stakeholders stating something and then another set of stakeholders stating something else. And then you got to you got to triangulate all that information. I don't
yeah.
see that as much in SMB. I feel
Mm,
like they're all sort of aligned, rowing in the same direction. You know, it's not obviously the case everywhere, but that is one thing. You asked about the challenges in SMB.
yeah.
I would say the benefit is you run into less misalignment type of situations where you've got to step back, maybe get the AE involved, try to figure out what's the truth because you're hearing two
Yeah.
different versions. That
Yeah.
happens a lot less.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can totally see that. And do you find that they also have a little less patience for maybe demos that feel irrelevant or not as relevant? Because I could imagine that they are high-paced individuals, and I can imagine they wouldn't have a lot of patience for a demo that wasn't in line with what they were trying to achieve.
Yeah, I would love to have the folks on listening to us weigh in and chat, but I would say especially with SMB. There's not as many employees, right? People are doing often multifaceted jobs. I think the stakes can be higher because they don't have as much time to invest in this. I would say though, because I've had a lot of experience in enterprise, we can talk about that in a bit, but no executive wants to feel like their time is being wasted, right? So SMB, I just feel like they're trying to do so much. Now they're trying to do so much with less in this economic time. So I would say that the patience is definitely decreased.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you saw Jeff's question. He is asking, do you use demo automation software to scale faster? So do you use, and I'll make the question even a little bit broader. What automation or tooling, if anything, do you use specifically for managing and running the pre-sales team, and or do your team members use?
Yeah. So, hi, Jeff. I think Jeff and I connected like years ago in Pre-Sales Collective. So yes, we use demo automation software. We're a large partner with Consensus. And there are a lot of different types of demos we can leverage based on what we hear from the client. And I think that is becoming more and more important, right? Because, there's not a lot of companies are hiring heavily right now, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to think about how we can scale our teams better. So that is something, in fact, I was on a project team this year for Consensus and trying to increase the number of demos that we have available to SMB. So it's very much an initiative.
Excellent. And do your team members actually create the videos that are then being sent out via Consensus, or does your team just leverage those created by other groups?
Both.
It is both.
It's both. We have a team that can kind of do the voiceovers and have the editing capabilities, and then we can do them themselves if we want. We try to leverage, the corporate resources to do them, and we oftentimes script it because we're closer to the customer, right? So we want to make sure that we have the right messaging.
Yeah. How much do you expect your team members to customize the demos between, if they've got an opportunity to do discovery? Is there still time to do some customization and configuration before, or is it mostly just changing the message and the narrative?
I think it's again, you got to go back to the opportunity and weighing in. Hey, is this one of our biggest deals in quarter? Looking at is it touching multi areas? What's the deal size? Are they an existing client that's already bought in, or is this a new logo motion? So some of those things play into that answer. But I would say, and I'd love Chase, Tim, Carly, type in the text, but I think every meeting we try to change, is it a customer, a guest, a patron? We try to use the vernacular of the business. That's number one. Number two is we look at what we have uncovered in our discovery, and we try to hit all of the top key initiatives from that discovery and show in the customer journey how we can do that, better, faster, cheaper with Salesforce. But I would say we're spending a little bit of time, but it's nowhere near like with the enterprise. You may have one or two deals going on in that year, and it's a culmination of multi-weeks of discovery. So it's very different.
Yeah. Well, and I said this to you before, quote, backstage, but before we went live, hearing you talk about SMB makes me realize that I probably would have preferred just SMB, because I'm a fast moving person, and I get bored easily, and I love talking to small businesses, and I love the entrepreneurial mindset. And I think I made the mistake of thinking of SMB as more entry level or junior level. And I'm realizing now that for the right for a person who's in this field, but they have an entrepreneurial spirit, and they like working with or dealing with the small business owner, or the fast moving organizations, SMB is the perfect fit, right?
Oh, 110% on that, Chris. So one of the things, this is like my initiative that I want to really drive in the next few years, is figuring out how SMB can be a home and it can be a career choice for many of our seasoned account executives and system
Mm,
engineers. Like, it
mm,
has a lot of aspects that enterprise doesn't, right? We talked about it: diversity of industries, access to founders, interfacing a lot with private equity investors, um, volume and velocity business. You're never bored. You normally have 4 or 5 different things you're multitasking at once. I see Carly mentioned that in the chat. So,
yeah.
it's a pace that a lot of people just love.
Mm,
So I want to change this idea of having it be, this initial starting ground for folks, aspiring to career in tech. I'd like it to be where, maybe a third decide to go up market and verticalize because they have this passion for an industry or something just appeals to them. But for the folks that, love what we've discussed, why not stay in SMB? Why not make a career of it? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Well, and particularly, I'm going to go back to the last question when I was asking what level of customization do you expect? And you said, well, it depends on the engagement and the deal size and the organization that we're dealing with, and all, it depends on all these things. And as you were saying that, I found myself thinking, so we need to be very intentional with where we invest our time, how we invest our time. If you're new to this profession, that's a lot to expect, right? I mean, you need to be a pretty seasoned senior sales engineer to know how best to leverage your time and where to channel your energy. So I'm on board with this with this movement. You've opened my eyes to what SMB is for this profession, and frankly, I don't think, and I know I don't talk about this enough, and I don't think there's enough people, because we talk about giving demos, but that's a blanket comment, right? Or a blanket conversation. We need to be more specific. Are we talking about discovery enterprise? Are we talking discovery SMB? Are we talking demo enterprise? Are we talking demo SMB? Are we talking POC enterprise? Are we talking POC SMB? I mean, to me, this is an important delineation in this space. So I give you a great deal of credit for bringing this to the surface. I think it's awesome.
And I think too, like, when I talk to counterparts at other companies, like, SMB is just, it's a growth business in every software company that I've talked to. They're doing a lot of hiring in there. They are really thinking about the territories and how to carve them up to optimize the revenue
Yeah.
engine. And there's, I forget the exact number, Chris, but there's millions and millions of new small and medium businesses developing every year.
Yeah.
So it's growing within the current sector, and then we're constantly adding on accounts. So that's the other aspect of life, is that the universe is endless. I mean, as these
Yeah.
companies start new technology, boom, we got another prospect.
Yeah. Yeah. Something you said just triggered this thought, and that is, how important is how important is it for the product teams? So like in your case, Salesforce product teams, how important is it for them to be thinking about what they need to do in the platform or in the tools to better support SMB? Like, do very specific things have to be done in the products or in the licensing or the subscription models to better support that market?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. There's a lot of alignment we do with the product team. And there's a lot of alignment we do considering the price sensitivity of a small and medium business, to help grow with them.
Yeah,
And a lot of our pricing is out there on salesforce.com. So
of
you can
course.
see how that scales. But anyhow, yes. And we have a lot of sales engineers who are leads that work with the product team. So I love how we get these tiger teams together
That's awesome.
to espouse what we're hearing in the field, and that it helps, drive product innovations. We do that very frequently, and just the pace of change is so much faster than when I started my career. We're meeting very regularly. We're figuring out how quickly we can put these changes in the product. So again, it's pace, and you got to be up for a fast pace. You got to rev it up in SMB.
Rev it up. There you go.
Yep.
Rev it up. If I may, I'm inspired to ask you about the account executives that you work with in this space as well. So we've talked a little bit about
Mhm.
product, and I know you've been in it. You've worked both enterprise and SMB. Do you find that the account executives either have a different approach, a different mentality? Do your sales engineers, do they need to interact maybe in different ways with the AEs in this particular market?
Yeah. I would say the interaction's very different. We'll use Slack channels for all the accounts. A SC and an AE may have, 5 to 10 active Slack channels where we're communicating
Wow.
about what's going on with the accounts, right? So, um, again, it's very fast. We got to
Mm,
stay current on the information. The lead times, like I told you, we could be starting a deal and closing a deal within a few weeks. So
yeah.
the motion is very different.
Mm,
Whereas in an enterprise channel or an enterprise relationship, you may only have 3 AEs. 3 to 5 is what I've seen across
yeah.
different companies in the
Yeah.
enterprise ratios. And you're going deep, you're spending a lot of time in the account planning motion.
For
You're
sure.
going through QBRs where you're picking 2 or 3 accounts and executive maps, strategic initiatives, just going really deep. So I would say, in enterprise, we also see more deep relationships, right? Like
Right.
you're working with the SIs, you're trying to figure out, is there any other technology that's complementary to your pitch? So you get to know that other vendor that's in there.
Yeah.
We just don't have as much time to go do that in SMB.
Yeah.
So again, I would say it's account executives who just, the pace is very quick. A lot of these account executives are, either right out of school or in the first few years of their career. So the other thing I feel like is they're fearless too. A lot of them grew
Mm,
up as digital natives, right?
mm,
Started, basically their career and their, upbringing has all been, on phones, the internet, et cetera.
yeah.
So they're, they lean more to the digital connection with their
Mm,
clients versus a relationship orientation that a lot of folks who've been doing enterprise sales for a long time kind of lean into those live meetings and so forth.
yeah.
I think, being digital and quick and fast and nimble lends itself
Mm,
better in the SMB space.
for sure.
Um, but yeah, I feel like there's kind of a different personality with
Mm,
AEs that are enterprise versus SMB.
mm,
Um, but it's if you go back to it, we're all trying to meet the same goals, right? We're all trying to get a client to share where they need help, and we're all trying to be trusted advisors to that client. Like the deal motion may look very different, but the mechanics of it are the same.
Amen. Amen. What
Yeah.
is your mapping ratio or your pairing ratio? Is it more like a 1 to 8 or a 1 to 10 sort of thing?
Yeah, it varies
Yeah.
depending on geography, if it's small business or a larger range. I mentioned that, 45 to 200 within that, we even have a further stratification. So it depends. I would say you're right, kind of within the range.
Yeah.
And also like tenure of the SC, like there may be an
Yeah.
SC that just onboarded and they have what we call a trail guide SC that's helping them along their
Mm.
journey of
Yep.
onboarding. So, but the ratios are more in that realm versus the 3 to 5 that we see in enterprise more typically.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And is it a pool? Do you have a pooled model or do you have specific SEs aligned with specific AEs?
It is not pooled. We
Okay.
align by region and regional
Okay.
manager,
Okay.
and I'm a big proponent of that. I think that's really important to drive prioritization. Like imagine if you're a pooled model, right? And you're competing with 5 or 6 different RMs and their deal is the most important deal. Like we like to
Of
have
course.
it be one SC to one RM where
Okay.
possible, because I
Okay.
think that really helps. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I like that as well. Patty, let me just press our pause button. Believe it or not, I told you we were gonna be into this 45 minutes before we even knew it. So we're almost at the 45-minute mark. Folks, I'm talking to Patty Hager. She is a VP of solution engineering in the SMB space with Salesforce. She has a number of years of experience in this space and a wealth of knowledge. And we're only going to be together here for a few more minutes. If you've got any comments or questions that you care to share, please feel free to do so. Patty, I think one of the last questions that comes to mind is, let's just say, for example, I'm an enterprise sales, or I'm a sales engineer, and I'm predominantly working in an enterprise space, long sales cycles, deep relationships, and I'm feeling a little bit bored, or I'm thinking, maybe this SMB would be something that would really get me going. What are some of the things that I would have to be very intentional about if I were to make that switch from enterprise to SMB?
Yeah, I would find someone who is currently in SMB and serving that industry and try to shadow what their day looks like. I think that's
Mm,
really important, right? I did that a lot across my career journey. Like, I am a very like hands-on learner, so I got to see
mm,
like what the whole process is. So I would sit through a couple of meetings with an SMB client, see what it's like, see the motion. I think that's really important for you to assess if it's for you. Um, and then, just find maybe a frontline leader who's leading SMB to understand, like, okay, what does good look like? Tell me the metrics I'm going to be accountable to, and just try to understand that. So,
yeah,
an IC conversation and then a frontline manager conversation. And then, just reach out in LinkedIn. Like I get a lot of requests. Hey, Patty, I'd love to talk
yeah,
about your journey, about why SMB. Use the network. You've got a phenomenal network here, Chris, the Pre-Sales Collective. Also, like just leverage folks that have been doing this a while and they can
yeah,
give you comparisons.
yeah, yeah. That's really good. What's an indication that SMB might not be the right fit for somebody?
Yeah. I go back to the comment I made about kind of those linear thinkers, those
Mm,
folks that like to go really, really deep within one project,
mm,
and stay the course for months and months.
yeah,
You're not going to get that. It's just our business motion isn't like that. You may
yeah,
get one deal that's a little unique, but if that's your jam, I would say enterprise is more for you.
yeah,
um, I do see Barry had a question
yeah.
about
I saw
SMB
that.
business trends. Yeah. Do you want me to hit that now?
Please, please.
So I would say, obviously, capital is tight.
Yeah.
Some industries we're seeing pullback in. I'd say when we look at some industries that are spending more, we lean into those. I won't get into all the specifics. But we look at the industry, the growth, and we figure out where we go pivot based on current buying trends. So we have, an amazing operations team that helps us drive that insight. I think we're going to see improvement in probably a couple of quarters out. But it has been tough, no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really well said. I was curious, do you ever sense that smaller company, because you work with one of the largest, most well-known software companies in the world. Do you ever sense that the small companies are a little bit gun shy working with a large company like Salesforce, and or do you ever have to sort of convince them that no, we don't only do just work with large enterprise, we do work with SMB, right? Do you ever feel any of that or face any of that?
Of course, right? Like, because we cover the gamut,
Yeah.
from the very large to the very small. But that's where we, as pre-sales engineers and as account executives, need to share use cases, customer stories,
Mm,
talk about, the product piece you talked about, right? Like, we're not going to sell every add-on in our sales cloud. We're going to pick a couple of things that make the most sense for the client and have it be, approachable pricing for their size business. So we have to be very, very prescriptive in how we approach the client. And we have to do a good job of, brand marketing around that too. Like, we have our own Salesforce.com SMB site.
mm,
I, along with my team members, we're constantly in LinkedIn connecting with potential clients, talking about some things that make more sense for the smaller businesses. So,
love that.
we've got to be stewards of that information too.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. Well, and at the end of the day, I mean, another one of my favorite sayings: people buy from people, right? And they're not buying from Salesforce. They're buying from Patty Hager or Carly or any of the individuals on your team, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so yes, we represent the organization, but they have to know that they're dealing with individuals, right? So I love that. Patty, I know you have a 1 o'clock meeting, so I want to make sure that we get you to that meeting on time. This has been an absolute delight. Like I said, you have opened my eyes to the SMB space, and I have an entirely new appreciation for it. Anything else you would like to share in closing, or anything you thought we might cover that we haven't?
Well, I want to give you props, Chris, and I've got your book here. And we didn't rehearse this at all, everyone listening, but the 6 Habits of Highly Effective Sales Engineers, anyone in the business should read it. It helps you go back to the basics. I use this as, I've been doing this a long time. Like, if I gotten into any bad habits, do I need to just rethink things? So that's really important. And I would just say, go with a growth mindset. These are really tough
Mm,
economic times,
mm,
but automation helps drive improved productivity. And it's all about, no matter what size company, it's all about improving productivity, right? And figuring out where there might be redundant technologies that are in place that your system may be able to remove, so that reduces OpEx. So, I would just say perseverance, open, growth mindset. And, if anyone needs any coaching on SMB, I'm here. You can tell I'm super passionate about it, and I choose to be an SMB every day. So,
that's awesome. That's awesome. I remember that. I think the first time that you and I got on a Zoom call together, when you told me, Chris, I made the conscious strategic decision to get back into SMB. That was a quote that was sort of a disruptive truth for me. Like that statement alone changed the way that I thought about SMB. So, Patty, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll come back and be a guest again if that's something that you think you might be interested in.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Happy
well, thank you so much. Folks, thanks for tuning in. If you caught the recording, thanks for listening to the recording. I will be back next week for another edition of Tech Sales Advice. In the meantime, have a great week. Patty, hang around just for a minute. I'll give you your parting gift backstage for everyone else. Thank you so much. We'll see you again next week.